Well, this is episode 2 of 3000 NFL Mock Draft, a podcast / video cast. We'll work on getting the podcast up where myself, Kenneth Arthur, and Rob Staten of Seahawks Draft Blog talk about college football and how it relates to the next year's draft. This week, it is Monday, September 7th as we record this. We have not yet seen the Ohio State play, the number one team in the country. That'll be tonight. So unfortunately, we won't get to talk about that, but we do have a whole lot of other stuff to talk about as everybody started their season last week from Thursday up until yesterday, and so much going on. Rob, just if you just had your one big standout of the whole week, your one takeaway that maybe something that you were very excited about or that you really surprised you, what would it be?
Well, the couple of big positives for me were, I think, the performance of Shawn Coleman playing for Auburn, who is a guy who has battled a lot in his life, a serious illness as a former 5-star recruit, and to see him playing as well as he is for Auburn, and he's got every chance of going in the first round. Now, health-wise, he's going to have to convince teams that he's fully 100% and that he's ready to take the next level. But he was just incredibly impressive in the game against Louisville. If you're talking about a player, Kenny, who can play pretty much any position on the offensive line, he can do it. He's got the body shape, superb body control, starting position was fantastic. And you could just see in this game the things that are going to make him a major prospect. So when he gets his hands on you, it's almost impossible to disengage. It's over. As soon as he gets his hands on a defender, that's basically the end of the play. Handled the edge with ease, decent kick slide when he had to use it. Loves to get to the second level. Put a couple of defenders on the backside in the game as well. If there was one major positive from this weekend, it was the performance of the Auburn left tackle for me.
And what would you say, what's his eligibility for next? Does he have to go in next year? Does he have another time to stick around?
The expectation is that I think he's ready to go for the NFL next year. He's going to be part of that draft, and he's someone to keep an eye on because in what is going to end up being a bit of a loaded offensive tackle class, and I would suggest that it's very likely that Seattle are going to maybe spend some early focus looking at that position because the options are really good this year. So even if you're picking in the back end of round one, there's going to be some nice options there. Shawn Coleman, I don't think he's going to do what Greg Robinson did, which was suddenly emerge and then go in the first 2 or 3 picks. But he's certainly got the potential to go in the top 15, top 10. And if some of the health concerns put teams off for whatever reason, there's other guys like Decker at Ohio State who are probably going to have a real good chance to go even earlier, and 1 or 2 others, then he's someone that we should really keep an eye on as Seahawks fans. Shawn Coleman at Auburn.
Someone that we talked about in the first week that you're not as high on as everyone else is, Kristin Hackenberg, the quarterback of Penn State. Speaking of offensive line play, he's sacked 10 times. How much of that falls on him? How much of it is the people surrounding him? And just overall, what are your thoughts? You don't really, you're even lower on Kristin Hackenberg this week, aren't you?
It's hard not to be, given that he just isn't progressing. And this is a guy who is living a little bit off the recruitment hype that he had when he joined Penn State. A lot of teams were after him. He made a big decision to stay at Penn State. When the controversy was going on there, could easily have gone to a better situation, gone to a better team, and aided his development. And he deserves a lot of credit for saying, no, I've made this commitment and I'm going to stay at Penn State and I'm going to see this through. And then in his first year, you sort of say, okay, he's a freshman. We'll ignore some of the mistakes. We'll look at the raw ability and the potential that he's got. And he showed an awful lot there. But in the second year, a change of coach, loses Bill O'Brien, an awful lot of inconsistency there. So many throws that you just wanted to pull your hair out watching. And then you say, okay, a change of coach, change of system. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's see him this year. You're seeing him getting sacked. His offensive line is an absolute disgrace, and it's not helping him at all. But it's just another thing that is knocking him. It's obviously affecting his confidence. I don't think he trusts the protection. I think that he knows that he's got to get the ball out quickly. There was one play, Kenny, which summed up his entire game at the weekend, which is he took a snap, he felt pressure that wasn't there and threw it straight to a defender 5 yards away from him for what could easily been a pick six. I think they brought him down at the 2-yard line. It was a horrible, horrible throw. And even though NFL teams are really intrigued by his skill set, I mean, he has every physical trait that you want and the personality. Eventually, he's going to put it all together. Otherwise, he's just going to be another Javon Sneed, who was at Ole Miss a few years ago, had every kind of tool in the book. Maybe didn't have the mentality that Hackenberg's got, but was very toolsy. Was expected to go in the top 5 and ended up being undrafted.
Yeah, it's a bit weird how the NFL college system works, because I do know that, you can be the number 1 recruit in the country, have a terrible college career, and still get a shot in the NFL based on the hype that you had coming out of high school. And, whereas other guys that may not have the size or the athleticism don't get shots, but may actually be better players. Is there anyone who is the most disappointing player in terms of like the highest recruits in the last couple of years? Who are some of the most disappointing players that you could think of?
It's not so much that he's been really disappointing. I think it's just that he's not been able to live up to the hype, and that's Kemdichi at Ole Miss. He was genuinely thought of as someone who could be as good as Jadeveon Clowney. And from an athletic point of view, I don't know if you saw his touchdown at the weekend for Ole Miss, but he lined up. I don't even think he was as a tight end. He lined up as a receiver. He's a defensive end who weighs about 280 pounds.
Wow.
Cut it on the outside and ran 30 yards, sprinted into the end zone, and you wouldn't have thought any differently if he was a tight end. And a really athletic one at that, like a Kelsey type tight end, the way that he was darting into the end zone. So he's clearly got incredible, insane athletic potential, but he's never put it together at Ole Miss. And like I say, it's not so much that he's been a bad player in college, but the sky was the limit for him, and he's kind of taken a back step to some of the other great players that they've got at Ole Miss.
Just switching gears a little bit based on sort of what you're talking about, because it made me think of the Kristin Michael trade. What were your thoughts as far as Kristin Michael's 2.5 years in Seattle? Is he going to have a shot to actually perform in Dallas? In my opinion, he's still got a long ways to go. Just because they have a better offensive line or better for run blocking or whatever, he's still not very high on that depth chart. Or do you think that now that he's going to be able to mask some of his deficiencies because there may be bigger lanes to run through?
Well, the one thing on him is that when you watched him in college, he was clearly an incredible talent. With red flags galore. So he was in Kevin Sumlin's doghouse in the final year. He had a serious injury in his college career. It was ridiculous watching him in the Shrine game and just be 20 times better than anybody else on the field. And then at the combine, he overslept at the combine and missed a meeting. So another red flag. And I think there would have been a lot of teams in the league who just took him off the draft board, because as much potential that he had, there was just too many issues there, too many mental issues. And when Seattle drafted him, you were kind of thinking, well, okay, he's going to have to mature if he's going to have any chance, despite the fact that he was an incredible talent. Now, if the light switched on with him in a way that maybe it has for others like Bruce Irvin, who, let's be right here, is not necessarily a shining example. He's not Andrew Luck, is he? He's not the most shining example of a hardcore leader on the team. Somebody who lives like a monk, but at the same time, he's gone beyond. People expected him to fail because of character issues, and he hasn't. Yeah. And if Kristin Michael had got anywhere close to that, then he would have had a real chance to replace Marshawn Lynch. And I think that was the expectation, wasn't it? I mean, why would you draft Michael in 2013 without the possibility that he was the predecessor? The guy who was the successor to Marshawn Lynch. It hasn't worked for him. He goes to Dallas. He's going to get as good a chance as any of the other guys there because he's as talented as anybody else in that backfield. But he seems like a player to me who is always going to have had that potential and never deliver on it.
So like you said, they have to figure out what they're going to do next for Marshawn Lynch. They signed Fred Jackson, which may make them a better backfield overall for 2015, but definitely leaves them the door open for them to have to replace everybody in 2016. A couple of guys that you pointed out had good weekends. Derrick Henry at Alabama, 13 rushes for 147 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Alex Collins for Arkansas, 12 rushes for 127 yards and a touchdown. What are your thoughts on those two players and where they can end up?
Alex Collins is someone to keep an eye on here because Derrick Henry, with his incredible size, he's 6'3", 242 pounds, and the way that he was running away from defenders against Wisconsin like a gazelle just means that if he keeps this up and if he keeps this level of production up, he's going to be a Heisman candidate and he's going to go very early in the draft. But Alex Collins is a little bit more of a sleeper because when you've got Zeke Elliott and Derrick Henry getting a lot of attention, Alex Collins at Arkansas is a very interesting player. Pushes the pile, doesn't go down in the first contact, enough speed. You know, no one would say that he is, a 4.3, early 4.4 runner, but then neither's Marshawn Lynch. He isn't Lynch, by the way, but who is? You know, but he does fight for extra yards. He's got great vision. When he gets to that, gets a crease, he can explode. He can break off big runs. I implore everybody to go and watch the Texas A&M game from last year. I think the tape is on Draft Breakdown. So go and have a look at it. Go and see what he is capable of. And then if you get a chance to look at the highlights of this game from the weekend against UTEP, go and have a look because this guy has got every chance of being a really successful running back. And because Henry's a bit of an anomaly, you don't get many 6'3", 242-pound running backs. And Zeke Elliott, as good as he is, has got some issues. Alex Collins might be the most rounded and talented running back in college football this year. And he's going to play in a system that is going to run the ball more than they throw it this year, without a shadow of a doubt. They just keep running the ball in Arkansas. So he's someone to keep an eye on. He's a very interesting player. I'm not sure whether Seattle will look at 2016 as a draft to go early on running back because there were so many options in 2017, and I think Lynch is going to stick around a little longer than 1 year. So, but if they do go for running back next year, Alex Collins is one to watch big time.
There were a couple other guys that had big games, and then just let me know if you think they are anything. Quadri Olison from the Pit went 16 carries for 207 yards and a touchdown, average 12.9. And Marcus Marshall at Georgia Tech, 8 carries for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as Royce Freeman at Oregon, 21 carries for 180 yards and 3 touchdowns. Any thoughts on those 3 players?
Freeman had a fantastic weekend. I think that he's going to stick around until 2017. I'm not sure whether he's a redshirt sophomore or just a sophomore, but I think that it feels like he's going to stay till 2017 and be part of a great class with Nick Chubb and Leonard Fournette and Perrine at Oklahoma. So Freeman wants to keep an eye on maybe for 2017. Marshall is a guy who has got all the potential in the world, and when he came through and started his college career, was being rated as a guy who could go very, very early in the draft, but he's had injury issues. So he's got to try and solidify himself and stay healthy and convince teams that he is as good as advertised when he came through. And the Pittsburgh running back is actually the backup running back there because the original running back at Pittsburgh suffered a really bad knee injury early in the game at the weekend. So I've not had a chance to look at the backup running back at Pittsburgh, but he's going to get a real chance because he's going to be the starter the rest of the way.
It's a little bit maybe more tough to gauge receivers based on stats because of the way that college is set up. Which receivers were you really impressed with over the weekend?
To be honest, there was nobody who stood out, but the one that I was watching very closely was Duke Williams in the Auburn game. There was 2 reasons why I was watching this guy, because he's incredibly talented and showed how consistent he can be. He's got the size, the body control, good hands, the leadership, everything that you want, competitive edge, grit. And yet last year he struggled a bit because the passing game at Auburn was secondary to the read option and the running game, which you expect from Gus Malzahn. And then you watch the game at the weekend, and Jeremy Johnson is the Auburn quarterback this year, and he is horrendous. It is you could have put, I think, most quarterbacks in college football in there at the weekend and just said, hey, we're just going to wing it with this guy, and they would have performed better than Johnson. I mean, he was atrocious. And Williams had 3 catches for 40 yards in the end. And when watching the game, I couldn't help but feel like Williams came back this year. He could have declared for the last draft, and I couldn't help but think that was a mistake because he's not going to put the production up to boost his stock. People are going to question. They're going to look at the stats and scout him that way. They're going to wonder exactly how good he is because he isn't in even a moderate passing offense. He's in a pretty awful one. And I'm a bit worried for him because this is not the environment where he's going to excel and show what he can do.
Hashtag free Duke Williams, I guess, would be the takeaway there. Moving to the Pac-12, just an awful week for the Pac-12. They came in with 5 or 6 teams ranked. Stanford lost. Arizona State lost. Arizona barely beat Texas San Antonio. The Cougs maybe had the worst loss in the whole country, falling to Portland State when they were 31-point favorites. Washington held okay with Boise State, but didn't exactly look great on offense doing so. And then they lost, of course. Just how big of a fuck up was this weekend for Pac-12, especially the Pac-12 North?
It was a disaster, and pretty much the whole Pac-12. I mean, in the Texas A&M Arizona State game, Arizona State blown away in the second half. Stanford terrible. Washington just lost against Boise State, had with a bit of a comeback. They just fell short. Washington State, you really have to wonder how much longer that regime is going to get. This is year 4, and they're still having games like this, and the system just isn't clicking in the way that you would expect. And sadly for Washington State fans, they've got a very, very strong identity now with the coach and Leach, and you would expect 4 years in that you were going to see some improvements and just at least win the games you're supposed to win. I think that was the expectation for Washington State. Win the games you're supposed to win, show some development there, get a few wins on the board, be competitive, move on to next year. And instead they've already lost one game they should have won. So, where are they going? I think the only real highlight from the Pac-12, I also saw a bit of Oregon's game against Eastern Washington, and I really like Adams, the quarterback, who's going to at least get a chance early in the year, and he was great at Eastern Washington. But even then, he's not Russell Wilson, and anybody expecting that he is going to come and do the same thing that Russell Wilson did in Oregon, I just can't see it. He looks like he needs probably a year in this system and scheme to adapt and settle in. I mean, Wilson was playing at NC State and could have had Auburn. He could have followed Cam Newton at Auburn or gone to Wisconsin. He went to Wisconsin. We have to remember that Vernon Adams was at Eastern Washington last year, and it's going to take him a while to adjust to a new level. So I'm not even optimistic about Oregon. If there is one positive, it is there could be the renewed high quality rivalry between UCLA and USC, who both looked pretty good at the weekend. Josh Rosen, the true freshman quarterback at UCLA, looked really good. They've retained a lot of their stars. They've got some good players there. And then you look at USC, a very comfortable opening day victory. Cody Kessler looked very, very sharp, had 4 touchdowns against Arkansas State. If there is one concern, though, is that he was sacked 5 times. And if you're conceding 5 sacks against Arkansas State, what are you going to do in some of the tougher Pac-12 games?
So how would you what would you compare Josh Rosen to in recent history as far as true freshman quarterbacks? I mean, is there any comparison to be made? I know it's not very often that a big school would start a true freshman, or even against redshirt freshmen. Is there any comparison to be made? There
is a comparison, but it's strictly on the level of performance that we saw in his first game. Not in terms. I'm not trying to say that he is Jameis Winston, for example, but when Winston made his first start, everyone was kind of like, okay, I think it was against Pittsburgh, and everyone was like, what are we going to get here? We very highly rated freshmen coming in. How is he going to perform? And he had a 3 touchdown performance. Everything came off, didn't throw any interceptions, and looked really, really sharp. And people were like, okay, this guy, he gets it. He's okay. And then when you watch Rosen, you see that same level of confidence, a surety. Didn't come close to really turning the ball over. Made some really, really high quality throws for touchdowns. Whereas someone like Vernon Adams, for example, throws a really awkward looking fade for a touchdown against Eastern Washington. All of Rosen's TDs there was one over the top of a defender to the back end of the end zone, which was just superb, considering it was his first start for UCLA. So while he is not nobody would suggest that he has the same level of talent as Jameis Winston, who's just been the number one overall pick in an NFL draft. The level of confidence and the level of performance was similar to Winston's first start for Florida State.
And then any other players on the West Coast in the Pac-12 that just in any position that sort of stand out to you that might have huge seasons, whether on offense or defense, maybe surprise in that way?
I think that it was good to see Kenny Clark for UCLA having the performance that he also had an offensive touchdown there. His was a little closer than Kem Deitch's. He didn't have to do as much running, but it shows what an athletic player he is, and it shows what an athletic player that Myles Jack is, that they've played offense for UCLA, and Clark is one to keep an eye on. And I thought that Kessler's display was encouraging enough to sort of think, okay, that maybe he's going to take another level this year, and that maybe if we're looking for a quarterback who can emerge, I wasn't impressed with Connor Cook at all for Michigan State. I've watched that game and didn't like what I saw there. So if Kessler can maybe leapfrog guys like that, I don't think that Kessler's going to end up being a first-round pick, but he could maybe get to the head of the queue for day 2 and day 3 ahead of some of those others.
So who is your leader for like the number one quarterback taken as of right now?
I think at the moment it's a very fluid situation. Like I said, not a fan of Connor Cook at all. I mean, Hackenberg's still got a chance just because of the tools and everything that is there. I like a couple of others that we haven't really talked about so far. One of them is Jacoby Brissett, who was at North Carolina. He is elusive, big, strong arm. Had a really good game against Florida State last year. And I'll keep mentioning him. And Carson Wentz is a guy to keep an eye on at North Dakota State. I don't think he's going to be a very early draft pick, but he's someone to keep an eye on. And I don't think that Cardale Jones is going to – I don't think that teams will buy into him as a package. They'll perhaps like the tools and like the arm and like the accuracy if he can put another good year of tape on the board. But I just don't think that teams are going to look at him and say, I can trust this guy as a franchise quarterback. It's just my opinion. I don't think he's I think he needs to mature. I think watching a few of his interviews, which is always a good indicator to sort of see where a guy is at, I think that he's quite a young early 20s guy, and it hasn't started a lot in his career, and maybe that is showing. And maybe with the responsibility this year of potentially being the starter for Ohio State, he can take the next step, but he's got to get there first. So unless Jared Goff is going to have a great year, I just can't see. I struggle to find the quarterback who is going to go early this year in the top 10. I don't think there is one at the moment.
So let's play a little game that we would call prospect, not a prospect. And we could just say that if someone like me, who didn't know anything, was looking at the leaderboards for quarterbacks, and you tell me whether or not these numbers mean anything, if they're a prospect or not a prospect. Well, let's just start with the leader in passing yards after 1 week. Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Obviously, a high passing offense. Prospect or not a prospect?
Not a guy that I've watched, but if he's at Texas Tech, then he's going to be a system quarterback without a shadow of a doubt. So I would say not a prospect.
Matt Johnson at Bowling Green, 27 of 49, 424 yards, 2 touchdowns.
I saw a couple of his throws, actually, which were pretty good, but you know, when's the last top quarterback that came out of Bowling Green? So,
I think it happens every year.
Yeah, I'm gonna say not a prospect.
Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma, 388 yards, 3 touchdowns. Prospect or not a prospect?
He's new, so he's someone we need to. I've not had a chance to look at him yet, so he's someone I will have a close look at during the season for sure.
This is another system. Baylor, Seth Russell, only completed half of his throws, but he had 376 yards and 5 touchdowns. Prospect or not a prospect?
They don't even have a playbook in Baylor. Their last guy who was moderately successful in it was not a high draft pick, so I'm going to say not a prospect.
How about this? I like this name, Skylar Howard, West Virginia, 359 yards, 2 touchdowns. Is he a prospect?
He's not, but he's fun to watch.
Yeah. And then there's a high number of completions. Malik Zaire at Notre Dame, 19 of 22, 313 yards, 3 touchdowns.
He's a left-handed, funky thrower. I don't like his chances at all at the NFL level now.
Let's do a couple more here. Brandon Allen at Arkansas. He's talked about Arkansas 14 of 18 for 4 touchdowns. Is he just in a good system?
He's not gonna. He had the touchdowns because they played a UTEP, a weak opponent. They're gonna there'll be games when they don't even throw it 10 times in a game, and they just run and run. I mean, it's ridiculous how often they run. So, I having seen plenty of him already, I think it's safe to say that it would be a surprise if he developed into a pro prospect.
How about Everett Golson? He was a big transfer. He is getting a second chance. Now he's with Florida State. He had a big game, 4 touchdowns, 300 yards.
He's one of the most frustrating players you'll watch because, funny enough, one of his best games was against Florida State last year when Notre Dame probably should have won that game. And he showed in that contest that he can be an accurate thrower and that he can do everything that you want. And he's mobile and he's got a decent arm. And then late in the season for Notre Dame, he just melted down and was benched and couldn't stop throwing interceptions and just looked horrendous. And Florida State are giving him a chance. Good for them. They want to try and stay at the top. They obviously feel that he's transferring him from Notre Dame gives them a chance to try and stay near the top end. I think we're going to see exactly the same from him in that he will start on fire. People will be talking about him 3-4 weeks down the line. And then there'll be a game against a tough opponent, one of the tougher teams in the ACC, and he will have a interception fest, and he'll have 3 or 4 picks, and the confidence will go, and that'll be him done.
Last one, Nick Stevens. He's the only guy that had 5 touchdowns and no interceptions, playing for Colorado State. Prospect or not a prospect?
He's a new starter. Obviously, Garrett Grayson getting drafted last year. He may be one to keep an eye on just because I'm a big fan of McCray, who's now in Florida, and if he's had anything to do with him, then why not? You know, because he's a top coach, and Florida's going to surprise a few people this year, I think.
One guy moving off of quarterbacks, a guy that you pointed out to me, I think I love the name, Pharoh Cooper. Tell me more about what he can do.
Okay, so the South Carolina-North Carolina game was horrendous. Again, really bad quarterback play. And the first half, it was the first game of the season, the proper game, and one of the less interesting first halves you'll ever see because neither quarterback was doing anything. And then in an attempt to get things going, they suddenly just you almost said to the South Carolina quarterback was really, really struggling. Just sort of hold him out of there and put Pharoh Cooper, who was their best wide receiver and best athlete, at quarterback running the Wildcat, and he just became the entire offense. So one play he's running it forward, he's handing it off, and then he was lining up a receiver again and catching a pass. And until he got hurt, he was basically the South Carolina offense. And he's not a big guy, but he's sturdy. He's an incredible athlete. He's going to be the focal point of everything that South Carolina does. We're going to see a lot of him because he plays for a competitive SEC team or SEC team, and he's one to keep an eye on. I'm not, Seattle. I don't think they're going to. From what we've seen, I'm not sure they're going to be in the market for an early pick at receiver. Maybe they will look to add some depth there, unless Kevin Smith or Williams on the practice squad step up. But he's definitely an interesting player, a great playmaker, and someone we should watch.
What about from a pass rushing standpoint? There's going to be guys out there in the next year's draft, and one of the things that people look out for, just like they do receivers and quarterbacks, is who's going to be the next guy to get 100 sacks. So, who are some of the guys that stood out that might be able to be that player?
Well, Myles Garrett is just a terrific prospect, and someone who is not eligible this year, but he's going to be probably in the 2017 draft. And he was explosive against Arizona State and virtually unblockable at times. I mean, his get off is so great. He's that kind of like Leo body frame. Texas A&M have had a pretty good history of finding, one edge rusher who can consistently get to the quarterback, and they have another one here in Myles Garrett. And it's going to be tough for him to emulate what Von Miller did going as early as he did in the draft. But Myles Garrett has all of the makings of a really early pick. Interestingly enough, he had a couple of sacks against Arizona State, but he was kind of outdone by his teammate, Deshaun Hall, who Washington fans will remember because he was committed to Washington. And then right at the line, I mean, like, I think the day that he was supposed to be finalizing everything, he made a U-turn and decided to commit to Texas A&M. He could easily have been in Washington right now. But he had 4 against Arizona State, and he is eligible for next year. And if he keeps up his level of performance the way that he played at the weekend, then people are going to start talking about him for sure.
Was there any just overall teams that impressed you more than you thought they would?
No, actually, I think it was quite an underwhelming weekend because I thought that Alabama toiled with Wisconsin in a way that I didn't expect because Wisconsin has lost a lot of players. There wasn't really anybody who I think that UCLA are going to get a lot of buzz. We're all waiting to see Ohio State take on the only team they lost to last year, Virginia Tech, and I think that the fact that they lost to Virginia Tech last year is going to mean that they come absolutely flying tonight. And I've seen people. I think Mark May predicted that Virginia Tech was going to win by a touchdown. I think that Ohio State's going to blow them off the field tonight. And I think that's probably the one thing that'll be the wrong that they right from last year. So Ohio State I think they will look good tonight. UCLA have got a chance to get out of the Pac-12 this year. If there is one sort of thing that I was pleasantly surprised with USC, and although they always get a bit overrated and then come back down to earth, I think they're one of the teams to look at. I think the game that I'm looking forward to the most is Michigan State against Oregon because I wasn't really impressed with either side or either quarterback more specifically. Connor Cook is a guy you will regularly see it mocked in top 10s and stuff like that. And he is incredibly overrated. I mean, there was just nothing special about his game. Still the same player he was last year, throws too many contests. I mean, every throw he makes, Kenny, seems to be either wide open and then an easy completion that me or you could have done, or it's a contested pass. So he never throws his receivers open. He throws into traffic all the time, gets away with it on occasions, just sort of puts a little bit more mustard on a throw, which gets it through a tight window. But in the NFL, those are going to get picked off. He's not elusive in the slightest and feels pressure and gets taken down, does not anticipate well enough. And when I watch him play, I was more enthusiastic about Kirk Cousins at Michigan State than I was Connor Cook. And Kirk Cousins has proven to be a pretty mediocre quarterback so far. He's got a chance to prove otherwise this year. But if Connor Cook is going to be even on a level par to what Kirk Cousins is, what is there to get excited about? The team that drafts him in the first round is just going to succumb themselves to average quarterback play that the likes of Miami and Cincinnati fans they just don't want to see anymore, and that is what they're stuck with for the next few years.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of this first week may have been a better matchup than second week. It looks like there's not going to be a whole lot of interesting matchups outside of that one. It looks like maybe Oklahoma at Tennessee. I know you said that you maybe like Tennessee. Do you think that Tennessee wins that game?
No, but I think that I saw a little bit of their game at the weekend, and they seem to be taking the steps forward. You know, like whereas other teams like Texas, for example, who got blown out by Notre Dame and just looked awful, horrendous, pathetic, diabolical, as if they're actually going backwards from the Mike Brown era, not forwards under Charlie Strong. And then you look at Tennessee, who similarly have just been horrendous for the last couple of years. You're actually starting to see some progression there and some progress and some players coming through, and they have a few playmakers, and I think they're going to be more competitive this year. Whether or not they actually do anything in the SEC remains to be seen, but I think they'll be a tougher team to beat.
So when does a Rob Staten make his first mock draft for 2016?
It's been varied. Like there was about 2 or 3 years ago, I did one quite early, and we started doing one every week, and I think we'd exhausted every possibility by the end of January, and it became my wife will tell you that when I was doing the mock drafts, it would take me all night to do it because I wanted to present something different, you know, a new discussion point, a new player for Seattle to be mocked with, so that the community at Seahawks Draft Blog could have the conversation on whether they liked the pick or whether, you know, the position was a need. And after so many weeks of doing this and having gone through maybe 10 or 12 different prospects, I didn't want to do anybody new. I just felt like I was changing it for the sake of it. And then the mock became very predictable. It was pretty much the same every week. So what I try and do is wait until as close to December as possible, sometimes into December, ahead of the bowl games. You've got an idea who's going to declare, who's not going to declare. You have a better chance then of making a mock that actually means something. I mean, I could do one today, but it wouldn't mean much. I mean, you wouldn't even want to go back and look at it in April or May to see how close it was, because it'd just be a mile off.
Can you get a sense of where you would sort of have your satellite, what players or positions you would have your satellite surrounding for the Seahawks, based on assuming that they'll be at the back of the draft as first round, and assuming what position, what sort of guys would be falling into that category?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very focused on offensive line play this year, which is why I wanted to pay particular attention to Shawn Coleman. It's why tonight I'm going to pay a lot of attention to Taylor Decker. I will take the opportunity to watch Jermaine Ifedi again. I like what I saw from him for Texas A&M, and one or two others. And there is a really good crop of offensive linemen potentially declaring for this draft, a decent crop of running backs, and a lot of good defensive talent as well. I mean, there are good defensive players, not necessarily ones that are going to go in the first round. I mean, you've got a guy like Charles Tapper at Oklahoma, who has looked like an NFL player in terms of build and size, playing college football for a while. It doesn't mean that he's going to cut to the next level and suddenly beast everyone the way he does for Oklahoma. He will be brought down to earth because he will just be playing against people who are similar to him. But he still is a very, very interesting player. And then the cornerbacks, Seattle could theoretically be looking at two positions that they haven't drafted in the first round before and probably would have not considered it a few years ago, running back and cornerback. One, because they drafted cornerbacks really well later on, and running back because they've had Marshawn Lynch. And although they've taken second, fourth round quarterbacks in Turbin and Michael, they could look at it this year if the right guy is there, because they're in win now mode. And especially if they have to replace Lynch, they might be aggressive. There is an awful lot of good cornerbacks potentially going to be part of this draft. So that is another position to look at. This could be a 4 to 5 or 6 first round cornerback draft.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. That's the end of episode 2, unless you have any other thoughts that you want to throw in there, Rob.
No, just looking forward to the isn't it funny, though, that this time next week, Kenny, when we're doing this, we will also know how the Seahawks got on in St. Louis.
Right.
And, I have no idea. That is, if it was out of all the season openers that Seattle have had over the last 3 or 4 years, I couldn't be more intrigued about this game, because I don't think Cam Chancellor's going to play, and we're going to see Jimmy Graham for the first time. We're going to see how Kerry Williams features at cornerback, or Tharold Simon if he gets a lot of looks there. And if Seattle could just win this game, prove that they can win without Cam, maybe send a message to Cam that he needs to get it, his backside into the VMAC and get going for Green Bay, then that would just set Seattle up for me to have a really good year. Yeah.
Did you ever take a look or do any research on Kelsey McCray, the player that they traded for as insurance at the safety position?
No, I mean, I think he was undrafted from Arkansas State, and it's just not a player that would ever be on your radar. I mean, he's a guy who, in fairness to him, has worked his way into the league and has stuck around with a few different teams. It's a bit of a head-scratching one because he seems like a key special teamer more than anything else, and a bit of depth for them there at safety. But they want to. I think I've got a feeling they want to be the best special teams unit in the league. And if all he does is destroy a few gunners for the opponent, and if that's something that they haven't got in the team, they've got a lot of speed, they've got Lockett as a gunner themselves, then maybe that 5th round pick will be well spent, because they're in win now mode. I mean, people can complain about spending picks as much as they want. The Seahawks have probably got, over the next 2 or 3 years, they could win the next 2 or 3 Super Bowls. They could win the next 3. They could win the next 4. But then that'll be it. And then they'll have to move on and rebuild. So this is the window now. So spending a 5th round pick on even a special teamer who might help you every week, I can see why they would do it, because they want to win. They want to win a championship this year. They're not building for 2 or 3 years down the line.
Yeah, I don't think that B.J. Daniels made the team as a because of his play at wide receiver or because of his play at quarterback. I think he made it because he can do a little bit of that, but also Pete Carroll talked a lot about how hard he works on special teams and that he just knows that he's the type of guy that is a Seahawk, one of Pete Carroll's players.
He's also good insurance for this week if Tavares Jackson is not ready. So let's say you cut B.J. Daniels, and then Tavares Jackson is not ready to go on Sunday. Then what are you going to do? You're going to have Archer on the bench, and then Russell Wilson gets hurt because Robert Quinn or Chris Long or Aaron Donald or Michael Brockers has laid on top of him and hurt his shoulder or something like that, or giving him a concussion, and all of a sudden Archer's there on the field. I mean, they have kept B.J. Daniels, for me, as more than anything a 1 week insurance just in case Tavares Jackson is not 100% or he can't go or he's struggling with the injury in the game if he has to play. I think they've kept him around for maybe 1 or 2 weeks. It wouldn't be surprising if B.J. Daniels was off that roster and in even a couple of weeks. It's harsh, but I get the impression they kept him there because of his ability to potentially play quarterback.
I mean, isn't it amazing too that you just have a team that has been the best team in the NFL over the last 2 to 3 years, a team that was close to winning the Super Bowl, and you would think, yeah, then they've kept them all together. The perception is that they stay the same, but look at the fluidity. We're going to see the Seahawks on Sunday, and we're going to see Fred Jackson on the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to see Jimmy Graham on the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to see Tyler Lockett on the Seattle Seahawks. He's going to play a lot. We're going to see a lot of Frank Clark. We're going to see a lot of Cassius Marsh, who didn't play last year for Metch. We're going to see Atiba Rubin. We're going to see Kerry Williams. We're going to see a different strong safety than Cam Chancellor, and yet they still should be favored to win the Super Bowl. It's amazing how many new guys and, better guys in many cases. Like, I can't even that's what I'm most excited about is probably that front seven, which, I think has the potential to be the best in the NFL.
It does. I mean, we can talk about, let's not kidding around. Robert Quinn is sensational, and Aaron Donald is also sensational. But Chris Long is not the same Chris Long that he was 3 or 4 years ago. And Michael Brockers, I think they were trying to trade him in the offseason. So, and I know that they signed Nick Fairley, but again, he's never really lived up to his potential. So when you look at their defensive front, they've got 2 superstars and some nice complementary pieces. Seattle haven't got any genuine superstars. I guess Michael Bennett's the closest thing. But what they have got is brilliant. Bennett's brilliant. Avrill's brilliant. Clark looks like he could be brilliant. Mebane, very, very good. Not seeing anything from Rubin to diminish him. Jordan Hill looks great. Cassius Marsh. So Seattle might not have 2 superstars, but they've probably got better overall depth there. And they will cause a horrible St. Louis line. Hopefully as many problems as St. Louis's causes Seattle's very young offensive line.
Yeah. Are there any expectations for what you think you'll see out of Nick Foles this week?
That's a great question because we watched Austin Davis, who I liked a lot in college, just dink and dunk Seattle to a slow death in the last game. Not consistently throughout the whole game. Obviously, there are 2 huge special teams players which won St. Louis the game, in particular that bizarre fake punt thing, which kind of like they had Tavon Austin diving on the right side and then the other receiver, Stedman Bailey, on the left, racing down the sideline, having fooled everybody. But when St. Louis needed a drive, when Seattle had all the momentum, I think Cooper Helfert had just scored a brilliant touchdown, and Seattle were looking for a quick 3 and out, and Davis just marched St. Louis down the field with a series of short passes, and they scored a touchdown, and it made it really hard for Seattle after that. Nick Foles is not a good quarterback in terms of what we've seen so far. He's an average quarterback. Yet he's more than capable of just dinking it underneath 3 or 4 yards, running play 3 or 4 yards. Nick Foles getting the conversion on a crossing route and just moving the chains and stuff like that for it to be a threat. But I tell you one thing, he has got cement in his shoes. And if Seattle can get that front seven going, if Frank Clark can work the edge or dip inside with Michael Bennett, if Cliff Averill can have a big game, if Bruce Irvin, who we didn't talk about when we were talking about all those players that Seattle have got up front, if they can find a way to impact. Seattle's line is young with great. I still think that Tom Cable's a great coach. A young line with great coaching. St. Louis have not got anyone like Tom Cable working for them. Jeff Fisher's great, but they haven't got a Tom Cable, and their line is not young and necessarily upcoming. It's kind of just like thrown together. And they're going to have a real job on protecting against Seattle's front seven the way they've played in preseason.
Yeah, and if you had to make one bet, would you rather bet that Tyler Lockett scores a touchdown on any facet of the game or that Frank Clark gets a sack?
I'll go with a Frank Clark sack, because if there's one thing that Jeff Fisher's done is won the special teams battle against Seattle every single time the Seahawks have gone to St. Louis. He's always found a way to nullify the Seahawks and create a couple of big plays himself. So I'll take the Frank Clark sack on this one.
Lockett scored 3 touchdowns in 4 games in the preseason, I know, but he still looked amazing in those facets. So if you took all of the Tyler Lockett, how much he's going to play on offense, how much of a role he's going to play on in the red zone, how much of a role he's going to play on punts and kicks, what would be your over/under as far as touchdowns by Lockett?
I think he's gonna have a bigger role than we ever imagined, because I think that he's earned the trust of the coaches. I think that Pete Carroll sees a guy who is ready, sees a guy who has got the bloodlines, sees a guy who in college football played the game as if he was a pro for years, has got the maturity, has got the attitude, has got the grit that Seattle looked for. And while they are never going to be the kind of team that is high volume passing, that would give him the chance to put up crazy numbers like a Brandon Cooks did last year as a rookie, they're going to find a role for him. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's taken a catch or 2 every game, and ended up with 30 catches, 35 catches in a season, which, in fairness, I think is probably more than, it doesn't sound much, but it's probably more than we expected. And a few of those catches will be big plays, by the way. And he will have a tremendous impact on special teams. That touchdown against Oakland's backups, admittedly, was just him down to a T, finding a way to get open. It is an innate quality that only a very few players have. And he may be small like Golden Tate, but he's a completely different player. Golden Tate never got open in a way that Tyler Lockett gets open. And neither does Doug Baldwin, and in fairness, and neither does, although Baldwin does get open, but not in the same way. Jermaine Kearse is a contested catch artist. He's not a guy who gets open with a move. Right. Tyler Lockett gets open. He's going to be, if he carries on the way that he started, he's going to be equally as effective as Frank Clark.
Do you see any end arounds in Tyler Lockett's future? Any carries, perhaps?
It's a good shout. The way that he works in space, the way that he's worked on special teams so far, I think you'd be daft not to consider it.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. That's why we got on a tangent about the Seahawks right now. So it's definitely going to be, it's exciting to know that they'll be playing. It would be nice if they were playing on Thursday, but what are you going to do? Then they're going to have to go back and try and win the Super Bowl this time, and then they'll play on next year's Thursday. So we got a whole weekend of college football, and then a whole week of NFL football, and then we'll be coming back next week to talk about all of it and how it lines up for the next draft. So this video should be available on fieldgoals.com, seahawksdraftblog.com, and we will get these out to your iTunes subscriptions as soon as possible, every Monday or Tuesday, depending on how it sort of organically transforms over the years, but over the coming weeks, I should say. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will see you next week.